about political cartooning in Portland. I'm Kristen Rogers-Brown. Thank you. I'm head of the graphic design department here, but have also taught in illustration, which is kind of the home for this event in our little community here. We're excited to be part of Portland Design Month, and I'm going to let Melissa do a better introduction to the event and all of that, but I wanted to start with a quick land acknowledgement. Portland, Oregon, lies within the traditional homelands of the Multnomah, Oregon City, Tumwater, Watlala, and Clackamas Chinooks, and the Tualatin and Kalapuya peoples, who were relocated to the Grand Ronde Reservation under the Kalapuya, etc., 1855 ratified treaty, which is also known as the Willamette Valley Treaty in 1855. Today, these tribes are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. The Grand Ronde people continue to maintain a connection to their ancestral homelands here and maintain their traditional cultural practices, and we're honored to take a minute. All right. So without too much introduction, Melissa Delzio is an assistant professor here in design history. She teaches a variety of perspectives on graphic design and design arts through art history, and also mentors thesis projects. And we're excited that she's chosen to share her most recent research with us as part of the Portland PDX Design History Project. And I've known Melissa for a really long time. We've collaborated through Design Month events, Design Week events, AIGA events, personal projects. We've become good friends and love to go on hikes sometimes too. But I can think of no better person to kind of walk us through this world than her. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Melissa.
Thank you all. Can you hear me okay? All right. I hope you are all able to enjoy the political comic fair and see in real life some of the images that we're going to see today. Especially with comics on screen, it's sometimes hard to read all the, see all the details. So I'm glad, hopefully a lot of you got to view some work. Thank you so much, PNCA, and to Kristen for helping organize and host us here. Thank you to AIGA for putting on Design Month. I know it's an all-volunteer-run organization because Kristen and I were a part of that for a really long time. And so thank you all for your contributions. We have a really strong creative community here in Portland, and there's times like this when I really feel that. So thank you all so much for all the work you're doing. I wanted to shout out Adobe. They're a sponsor tonight, and they're hosting 2 events coming up, a creative cafe geared towards students or early designers. This is an opportunity for portfolio reviews, career advice, and headshots, and a Create Now event for creative professionals to hear about what's new in the Adobe Creative Cloud. So part of the Design Month lineup. Also, my friend Michael Ellsworth is very busy in town and hosting a couple events coming up. So I wanted to give a few of these a shout out, especially the PSU Kameni Lecture Series is happening coming up. Luckily, this is the start of Design Month. So if you go to Design Month, AIGA Design Month, search for it, you will find these events and a lot more. So it's for, I don't know when it ends, but it's a few more weeks in October. So I'm Melissa Delzio, she, her pronouns. I have a studio, Meldel, and I teach here. I started this Portland Design History Project over 10 years ago when I saw a need for a community resource showcasing designers' work that was being forgotten in the wave of the digital revolution. Since 2014, I've conducted dozens of interviews, scanned hundreds of pieces of work, and dug through many archives and written many articles, which you can find online. And I'm excited to share some of this work with you today. For over a century, cartoonists in Portland have illustrated characters that drove the mythology of the Pacific Northwest, offered biting commentary to the powers that be, and gave a framework for regional and national issues. My talk will be divided between the work of Portland cartoonists in the mainstream press and artists of the alternative press, aka the alties. After my talk, I will invite local comic artists and writers, Shay, Jonathan Hill, and David Walker up to have a discussion about the contemporary evolutions of comic journalism in all of its permutations. And you should all have index cards and pencils. Those are for if you want to jot a note, or if you want to doodle, draw a cartoon, if you're inspired, or write a question during the panel. We're going to collect questions and for the panelists later. In the service of academic discourse, I will be sharing some cartoons from previous eras that we would consider racist or that further negative stereotypes. In these instances, I will give you a content warning. To start, I thought we would take a long view in order to put the Portland work in context. Today, we may associate caricature with silly, exaggerated portraits that one may have done at a state fair, but the art form's history is that of a weapon. Across history, tyrants treated caricature artists as grave threats, and many were jailed or killed for their work. In 1835, the King of France, in an act of censorship, jailed multiple French cartoonists. Their crimes included depicting the king as a pear and a glutton. The king defended his decision to jail cartoonists by saying, quote, "A pamphlet is a mere violation of opinion, but a caricature amounts to an act of violence." The secret to why political cartoons hold so much power to disrupt may lie in our brains. Neuroscientists theorize that when a visual metaphor like king plus pear takes two disparate ideas in the brain and maps them together, they become a super stimuli. In an American example, we can quote William Boss Tweed, a corrupt and embezzling New York City politician in the 1870s, who said, "Stop them damned pictures," as his criminal acts were slowly being exposed by Thomas Nast's unflattering caricatures. You need only work at the work of Jose Guadalupe Posada to see that this art form was indeed universal. One of Jose's most famous creations, La Catrina, on the right, mocks the bougie upper class who were ashamed of their indigenous origins. They dressed imitating the French style with makeup to make their skin look whiter. This Catrina was created in 1910 when the Mexican Revolution was gaining steam. There is an emotional resonance in cartoons as well that form a connection, especially when you have regular characters. Here's the work of Jackie Ormez, the first Black woman to have a nationally syndicated comic. Her cartoon, Patty, Joe, and Ginger, covered a range of issues from the Great Migration to McCarthyism, from the perspective of two sisters you felt like you knew. Despite the impact of cartoons throughout history, they were often deemed unimportant, frivolous, or childish by art historians. Famous caricaturist Ralph Steadman is quoted as saying about his own art form, quote, "It is nothing but a cheap joke, a space filler, propaganda." Historians claim that political cartoons are more than that. They provide a vent, an outlet for ridicule. According to them, when artists are jailed or otherwise silenced, a violent resistance becomes more inevitable. Authors of the art of satire describe how this has played out in 1800s Europe and beyond. Artists disagree about the best way to react to tyrants. In the 1930s, David Lowe, a London cartoonist, famous for his caricatures of Hitler, thought that cartoons showing leaders as ruthless and power-hungry would only feed their vanity. He thought if you show them as idiots, it would really get under their skin. Humor can be harnessed to reduce power. On the flip side, W.A. Coop posited that by depicting tyrants as figures of fun, David Lowe and others may have made them less threatening. Laughing at our political predicaments may shield us from reality, he says. Ralph Steadman later in his career urged other cartoonists to follow in his example and stop drawing politicians at all costs. Portraying them daily was contributing to their already inflated ego. While artists may disagree about whether exaggerating, mocking, or ignoring is the right approach, they typically align on the goal of a political cartoon to get people to feel something: anger, pride, sadness, hope. This cartoon is by Nina Allender. Her work was key in the fight for women's suffrage and equality. The art of political cartooning expands beyond the one-panel cartoon. We'll see later the cartoonists of the alternative press who weren't afraid to lean into long-form personal stories, to use emotions and identity to drive home broader political ideas. But this practice was born much earlier. In 1946, Minne Okobu's Citizen 13660 was the first book published about Japanese internment camps from the perspective of a former incarceree. Minne was a Japanese-American artist from San Francisco who illustrated her lived experience in the concentration camps, drawing herself into the work. Some say this was the first graphic novel and graphic memoir ever published, long before those terms were coined. Cartoons haven't always been used to speak out against injustice. A content warning that this next slide contains racist imagery. Cartoons have been used to demonize an enemy in service of war or white supremacy, to perpetuate stereotypes which act as the visual equivalent of a slur. In an extreme example, a series of 75 editorial cartoons were commissioned in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898 to stoke fears about Black citizens who had gained political positions. This led up to the only successful coup in US history, where white leaders overthrew elected Black leaders. A reminder that the power of political cartoons is not always yielded against the dominant class. With that background, I want to introduce you to the first mainstream political cartoonist from Portland's Oregonian newspaper, spanning the years 1901 to 1983. What I am presenting today represents a fraction of this longer list. Don't worry, we're not going through all of those. All the folks on this list are men. Women have been largely marginalized in the field of political cartooning historically, and my research found this was especially so in Portland. In the early days of Portland, women were not allowed to vote, did not occupy space in the political sphere. Artwork they did create professionally was not taken as seriously, not documented in the same way, or was relegated to society pages. Women historically have been socialized to be polite, and political cartoons are often rude. Portland was a lumber town at its start, and men outnumbered women until the 1980s. As we evaluate this work, just note, these cartoons were designed by men, featured primarily men, and were mostly for men. Oh, that turned out really blurry on here. This is a historic photo, and that's the only example of it I could find. With that preamble, I would like to introduce you to members of the Oregonian Art Department across generations. Since 1850, Portland has been home to the Oregonian newspaper, the oldest newspaper in continuous production on the West Coast. From the start, it was a paper that had an angle to prop up business and commercial interests in Portland and to sell economic viability. It wasn't until the mid-1890s, here in this clock tower, that the earliest newspaper artists sat down to their drawing boards in the tallest building in Portland. The political leanings of the cartoonists ranged as the baton was passed across decades, even though the Oregonian overall was known as a more moderate to conservative paper. While records of earlier press artists exist, The title of the first political cartoonist for the Oregonian goes to Harry Daniel Murphy. Harry took on the role in 1901. This 1900 work, which Harry did as a freelancer, is the first illustration I came across in my Portland research that I would classify as a political cartoon. It shows an elated, almost demonic Uncle Sam celebrating President McKinley's election. It is, however, an outlier. Most of Harry's earliest illustrations are portraits of prominent men from the news of the day. By 1904, Harry had found his voice as a cartoonist. We see him experiment with a new multi-panel format that was thematic but not narrative. He included an over-explanatory headline written in third person. The cartoons were often humorous, tongue-in-cheek, without being too biting. In 1909, Harry employed the Donkefant in I don't know if I'm saying that right, Donkefant, in criticism of candidates he thought were trying too hard to appease both sides. Critiques of Harry put him on blast. One aggrieved reader in 1909 said, "Many times I have been disgusted by your cartoons. I have never in my life seen such harrowing scenes. How anyone with a sense of refinement can see anything in all the grimaces and distorted countenance." This critic called himself interested visitor. He wasn't even a Portlander. Unfortunately, Harry Murphy did not reach his full potential as a cartoonist until he left Portland in 1914. He moved on and was heralded as an up-and-comer at the Chicago Tribune. Continued cartooning across the U.S. at papers from St. Louis to San Diego. He lived in La Jolla until his death in 1973 at age 93. Tige Reynolds was the next cartoonist up to bat at the Oregonian. Tige had gotten his first newspaper job as a printer's devil, which was a term for a lowly typesetter apprentice. Newspaper work was not a cush job in the 1800s. While reporting in California, Tige was beaten by a, quote, berserk longshoreman and had his clothes torn with bullets from a Chinese Tong War. Despite this, he faced his work with enthusiasm. Note his tiger namesake in the corner. Inserting a mascot into your cartoon was a convention developed by cartoonists like Clifford Berryman. He adopted the bear to represent the cartoonist's perspective, serve as a sidekick, or add a layer of depth to the cartoon outside of the main action. Tige's tiger did just that. Tige arrived in Portland in 1911, where he settled in for the first of 2 stints at the Oregonian. For 15 years, he drew a daily cartoon. After a 5-year stint in Tacoma, he returned to the Oregonian with this cartoon with a very Harry Murphy-style long headline. Tige's comeback coincided with the debut of a KGW radio variety show called The Hoot Owls broadcast from the iconic Oregonian Tower offices. The Hoot Owls parodied a mystical fraternal order and featured satirical sketch comedy and musical acts. Tige was a hoot owl for 6 years, contributing to sketches, creating promotional artwork, and playing piano. Many strange stories about the hoot owls exist in the archived papers, but the most odd is that there appears to have been a real live goat who was present at recordings. There are reports of bathing and feeding the goat and hearing bleats on air. Riding the goat seemed to be an initiation rite for this order. This caused me to Google riding the goat and then go down a rabbit hole because apparently this is a common initiation in fraternal orders. Never knew. Circled in the photo is Tig, and what I believe is Sweet William the Grand Goat. Tig died from an illness rather suddenly in 1931, and a memorial cartoon ran in the Oregonian in honor of him. In it, a forlorn cub gazes at the empty cartoonist's desk. An editorial said, "No more will the kiddies look for the smiles and winks of the little tiger cub that peered always from the drawings of Tig Reynolds." The next Oregonian cartoonist in the saddle was one of the most iconic. At once a cowboy, an army lieutenant, a civic leader, and a cartoonist, Quincy Scott's talents were varied. Growing up on the East Coast, he moved to New York City, where he started work as a freelance cartoonist. He would create one cartoon daily and try to sell them to the big papers. He found early success. In art classes at the Art Students League, he met Seattleite Ella Allen. Her adventurous spirit matched his and grew his interest in the West. Shortly after their wedding in 1906, the twosome decided to journey from St. Paul, Minnesota to Seattle on horseback. Both writers being artists, they documented their journey through extensive journals, illustrations, and photographs. Their daughter later compiled it all into a book called Horseback Honeymoon. Ella's illustration about treating her hair after a long outdoor adventure was very relatable. She was an original influencer. In the Northwest, Quincy's career took a meandering route, but in 1931, he returned to his first love, political cartooning, at his new job at the Oregonian. He settled into the cartoonist's desk behind the clock tower, trying to block out the busy noise of downtown Portland. Editorial meetings took place at 9 a.m., and he was to have a cartoon fully developed and inked and ready to go by 3. Typically, Quincy would present 3 or 4 ideas to the editor based on topics of the day and move forward with the chosen idea. Quincy embraces the classic one-panel illustration with expressive line work perfectly rendered in detailed cross-hatching. Works vary from light and humorous, yet still symbolic, to timeless and deeply resonant. He was known for using the Aesopian method of cartooning, where cartoonists encode a hidden message in their work and anthropomorphize animals. Quincy leaned into nationally known allegorical tropes like Uncle Sam representing the U.S., elephants representing Republicans, and donkeys representing Democrats. He also created new ones. Old Man and Ma Oregon represent the state of Oregon, and the New representing the out-of-control spending, in his mind, of FDR's New Deal policy. Quincy's opinions had nuance. He was in support of FDR's dam construction, but had concerns over the impact to salmon and was troubled by industrial pollution in the rivers. Looking back on his career, he remembers the Oregonian editors generally rubber stamping his work, and only rarely did he have to threaten to resign if his work was not printed. He said the arrangement was ideal. "No one ever told me what to do. If anyone's hand is on a cartoonist's wrists, he can't do the job." Leading up to World War II, Quincy's cartoons covered the rise of fascism in Europe with a keen understanding of its danger. He believed his cartoon showing Hitler as Napoleon was one of the first in the nation to bring attention to the serious threat. Quincy was called to serve in the war, and during his service, staff artist Ralph Lee acted as his substitute. When he returned from war, Quincy and Ralph shared the cartoonist role until Ralph's sudden death in 1947. This piece from 1945 shows their work, as well as cartoonists from across the globe who weighed in to gripe that President Truman's features were, quote, "too regular for caricature." quote, newspaper artists see his face as their misfortune. Like Tighe's memorial cartoon, Ralph's death was marked by an empty drawing board drawn by Quincy. No one sits in the south window this morning, it says. Another sorrowful cartoon from 1948 portrays the hardship that the wartime housing community of Vanport experienced in the Vanport flood. In an instant, a city was wiped away with one breach of a dike. In addition to being a skilled artist, Quincy Scott became known for his lectures, which he would regularly give around town, with titles like What and Why is a Cartoon and The Form and Essence of the Constitution. And Pictures Tell the Story, which is the name I stole for this event. He worked his way up to president of the City Club. In Quincy's last years at the Oregonian, his timeline for finished work was bumped up from 3 p.m. to 11:30 a.m. Quincy felt his style change and the overall quality of his work decrease due to the time restraint. He took an early retirement in 1949. These two cartoons show the stylistic shifts from the detailed cross-hatching of his early work to the looser lines and simplified compositions of his later work. Across the 18 years of that relentless schedule, Quincy had produced over 6,000 drawings. The cartoonist lived out his retirement years on the Oregon coast, gazing at the views which had called him west long ago. It is possible that Art Bimrose, with his calm, soft-spoken nature and everyman perspective, wasn't cut out to be a ruthless political satirist. But his lively lines and lighter touch subject matter may have been just what was needed in post-war Portland, when Art slid into the Oregonian cartoonist seat. Where Quincy Scott layered in detailed cross-hatching, Art relied on loose calligraphic lines filled with a rough texture. Where Quincy Scott liked schmoozing amongst the upper crust of Portland society, Art would prefer a quiet night at home. Art was known as a gentleman cartoonist, someone who could make their point without drawing blood. He got his lucky break when his cousin, Ralph Lee, staff artist at the Oregonian, invited him into the newsroom. He started as a photo retoucher and was happy to witness the energy of the newsroom business. Soon he started picking up illustration jobs here and there. Art's budding career was abruptly interrupted when he was drafted into World War II and served 2 years in combat in the South Pacific. He felt changed by the experience. When he came back home, he was lost in the senselessness of war. To Art, it didn't matter if it was a just war or an unjust war, it was just obscene. Once Quincy Scott retired in 1949, Art was tapped to take over as full-time cartoonist. Politically, they had different perspectives. While Quincy Scott was putting news back on the map with his New Deal takedowns, Art saw FDR's signature policy as a net good for guiding America out of the Depression. Like Quincy before him, Art was tasked with making 7 cartoons a week. Cartoon trends were changing. Cartoonists of Art's generation were getting away from the over-reliance on allegory like depicting Uncle Sam. Art said, if I want to depict the United States, then I'll use an everyday citizen and I'll just put US on him. Art's approach was to show the everyman in the landscape with the politicians so the reader could see themselves. He said, I like to draw the little guy, the voter, the taxpayer, the one getting the brunt of everything. As a child in Depression-era Portland, Art remembered his family struggling to pay bills. He and his father would collect scrap paper to sell to paper dealers. That stayed with him. You could say that Art saw himself in the everyman. Art's illustration philosophy was that the best cartoons were simple. Of course, newsroom deadlines also supported the simpler approach. Art acknowledged he was free to draw on any topic, but knew his limitations. When he disagreed with a take from the editorial board, he would have to draw in support of it anyways. Several times he tried to submit sketches for approval that pushed boundaries, and those sketches would end up right in the wastebasket. He said, quote, "I learned not to sketch out a cartoon that was in conflict with the policy. I was just wasting my time." The biggest conflict for Art was during Vietnam War years when the Oregonian backed Nixon and the war. Art tried to draw cartoons to show the plight of the combat soldier. He empathized with them. Later in life, Art spoke out more vociferously against the war as a retiree in 1985 during the Cold War. Art wrote a 2-page article with details of all the gruesome, traumatic experiences that he had experienced as a plea for level-headedness during the Cold War. He said, "Warfare does not play by the rules. It promotes degradation of all human values." Art delighted when Nixon's crimes were exposed during the Watergate scandal in 1972. It was a wonderful chance to finally jump on Nixon, he remembered with glee. It was a heyday for all cartoonists. Across his 34-year career as a cartoonist, shockingly, Art's illustration style doesn't change that much. From post-war Portland to the election of Reagan, his approach and tone stay the same. Art retired from the Oregonian in 1983, and December 13th was officially declared Arthur Bimrose Day by the city of Portland, the city that he loved. Where Art Bimrose was comfortable being a gentleman's cartoonist, William Sanderson held no punches. Surprisingly, they occupied the same editorial section of the Oregonian for many years. Known as a raconteur who could recite long stanzas of Shakespeare, William was so captivating a storyteller that in 1970, he was asked to bring his punchy cartoons to television. Here he is taking a jab at the Royal Rosarians. William Sanderson grew up in Walla Walla, Washington, and spent a few years at Whitman College before enlisting in the Army. When his military service was complete, he started as a reporter and photographer at an Oregon City newspaper before being hired by the Oregonian in 1960. On the right is a 1967 cartoon calling out a Karen long before that persona became popular. William's first cartoons were published in the Oregonian in 1963 under the header, "The Acid Test." Labeled as having a voice that could be crabby and contentious, in actuality, the cartoons allowed William an outlet to express his longing desire for things to be better. His daughter, Catherine, thought his cynicism was a cover-up for the deep disappointment of being heartbroken by everything all the time. William's cartoons often featured a mascot, just like Tig's tiger. William's mascot was Fred Nerdly, a bear, which, like William, is an observer, a commenter, and provider of a comedic quip. At the bottom of this cartoon on the left, Fred Nerdly looks annoyed as a man talks at him saying, "I don't care what you say as long as you don't say it." Stylistically, his work is as varied as Art Bimrose's was consistent. We see executions that are excruciatingly crosshatched and works that are painterly grayscale, shown on television. We see airy designs and panels with imposing black backgrounds. What is consistent is the frenetic energy in each that calls to you. By William Sanderson's pen, we see women and people of color finally represented on the page with some frequency. He had a broader view of political movements that was more inclusive of counterculture ideas. His daughter, Catherine, said he was equal in criticism as well. He held everyone into account. When Oregon Governor Barbara Roberts was elected, he said, "Now you'll learn women can screw things up as much as men." It's no surprise that his cartoons were not always enjoyed by the more conservative contingent of Oregonian readers. They were described as disgusting, untruthful propaganda. There were claims that the military and police representations were brutish, while hippies were skinny. This 1968 cartoon called out the coalition of unseemly characters, from white supremacists to conspiracy theorists, who were supporting Alabama governor and staunch segregationist George Wallace for president. In 1970, after years of heavy-hitting cartoons, William was invited to do something unique for the country, to present his cartoon of the day live on air, KGW Channel 8. For 3 years, William showed his work on the evening news, covering topics from Watergate and the Vietnam War to local and state issues. To deliver the lines, he would pick voice talent from the KGW office, and the camera would pan across the cartoon. In 1968, the resourceful cartoonist decided to self-publish a book of cartoons under the same name as his strip, The Acid Test. Oregon Governor Tom McCall, a former journalist himself, wrote the foreword in the later edition. He said, quote, "When William shows me as a jut-jawed, pot-bellied, indecisive dart thrower, I'm expected to enjoy it." And I do. William's work is not meant to be taken at a glance. It is meant for you to slow down and take time with it. After 1975, his career shifted dramatically away from journalism and cartooning. But for the short window of time he jolted the sleeping logging town, broadcast cartoons in prime time, and brought about a new era of cartooning. Now for that content warning. As I wrap up the work of the mainstream artists, I wanted to provide an acknowledgement that some of the old work doesn't hold up. It will not surprise you in searching through hundreds and hundreds of cartoons from the mainstreamers. I came across many that espouse racist ideas and stereotypes. Most commonly, I found examples of exotifying and stereotyping Native American people and demonizing and mocking Japanese people and culture during the years of World War II. Racist stereotypes can range from insensitive to demonizing. Even the font choice is not without critique. You can see the use of the chop suey fonts, or fonts used to denote, they were fonts used to denote Asianness common in this era. While some Asian people have co-opted these fonts to use to promote their businesses to white audiences, the font's original use was to mock and stoke xenophobia. Here we see Harry Murphy's cartoon reflecting his impressions of the 1905 Lewis and Clark exposition with a circus-style approach, highlighting the fair's promise to have Native American, Filipino, and Japanese people on display as exhibits. The Alties. When we think about the so-called Alties and their role in political cartoon history, we first have to widen our definition of what defines a political cartoon. Artists published in newspapers, yes, but in most cases they did not occupy a paid position in the newsroom. Rather, they worked as freelancers, outsiders, free from editorial restraints. Artists inserted themselves into their work, made it personal. Something taboo in the mainstream platforms. They broke out of the one-panel restraint and took over full spreads, as this Matt Worker piece from 1981. The volume of artists who contributed during the 3-decade heyday of the alternative press are too numerous to list, but I have chosen some artists to share with you whose works are monumentally important in fueling the creative community in Portland and the genre broadly. Now a Pulitzer Prize-winning political cartoonist and founding staff member of Politico, Matt Worker's cartoons were first seen in Portland's alternative press. Growing up in Los Angeles as an aspiring cartoonist, Matt got a tour of the LA Times as a kid. He was stoked about the idea that someone could get paid to draw all day while drinking whiskey and smoking. Matt was sold on the cartoonist life. He studied international affairs at Lewis and Clark College in Portland. Matt's early cartoons for the college paper highlight the hypocrisy of the school's discriminatory practices and also accompany lighter, only in Oregon stories. Matt remembers the pre-computer days of newspaper layout using X-Acto blades to cut out the copy and art, then apply hot wax to attach them to sheets with blue line grids. He said, all you did was burn your fingers with hot wax. Matt said he never had the disdain for the mainstream press like his fellow alties who, quote, complained about all the old fogies sticking to the single panel bold metaphor. As outsiders, it was easy to cast aspersions at the cartoonists in the ivory tower. Matt says there was a real culture war. He was proud to make a living freelancing, not working for the man or corporate media. The key was to get syndicated. But getting syndicated in the 80s from small town Portland was hard. Everything had to be sent by mail. Then fax machines came in and boom, you had rapid distribution of a new image in black and white. Suddenly, Matt's early cartoons were picked up by national magazines and Portland's indie papers alike. Matt Worker remembers Portland in the 80s as being a creative hotbed. You could rent a house for $150 a month, create something crazy, and live a bohemian lifestyle. When you add months of rain and a multitude of coffee houses, you have the perfect incubator for creative people. Clinton Street Quarterly's editor and art director, Jim Blashfield, invited Matt to contribute illustrations to the storied publication. Matt appreciated Jim's creative approach, which was anything goes at Clinton Street. In 2007, at age 50, Matt became the staff political cartoonist at Politico, where he still works today. He reflected that he finally did get a job working for the man because the man gave him health insurance. Today, Matt is one of about only 30 staff cartoonists in the country for the mainstream media. It won't surprise you that Matt Worker has Portland's back in the war on Portland. This was his cartoon last week. I want to give a brief shout out to Isaka Shamsuddin, who was an artist, educator, muralist, and activist known in Portland for his vibrant work celebrating and highlighting the Black community. Isaka survived the Vanport flood and fled a racist mob in the Jim Crow South, all before he turned 18. He was an artist whose work was as dramatic as his life. Isaka didn't consider himself a commercial illustrator, but he created a limited number of political cartoons and editorial illustrations for Clinton Street Quarterly in the 1980s. These cartoons dealt with the looming decision by the Portland School Board to start a busing desegregation program that would have disproportionately impacted Black students. The superintendent, critiqued by the Black United Front, was finally fired. This full-page cartoon by Isaka illustrates the greediness of PGE and Pacific Power companies. The companies were against a movement trying to create public utility districts in Portland. Isaka's cartoon expresses their out-of-control hoarding of power, pun intended. Isaka passed away this year. I was lucky to have heard him speak and see exhibitions of his work many times over the years. While his political cartooning footprint was light, his impact on the Portland arts community will resonate for many years to come. He leaves many vibrant murals in his wake. Whoop, whoop. At first glance, you might not think that cathartic comics strip fits into the theme of political cartooning with its 4-panel format and the brown bomber character as a clear superhero. But in fact, the strip's very name is a nod to how creator Rupert Kennard used the work to process his own feelings living as a Black gay man in America. Rupert hoped to convey a message through cartooning that could build a broader understanding. His strip was the first to feature Black LGBTQ+ characters in comics. Born in Chicago, Rupert's career in design and illustration started right after high school when he was hired in the promotions department of the Chicago Sun-Times in 1974. Rupert saw this as a golden opportunity to learn the newspaper business from the ground up and make friends in the art department. He said, "I felt like a sponge taking in their creativity." After months of nagging the art director for an assignment, Rupert finally got his chance to draw the comedian Red Fox. At 20 years old, Rupert had the thrill of seeing his first illustration in print and widely distributed across Chicago. Rupert enrolled in Cornell College, and it was there in the fall of 1973 that the brown bomber character debuted in the college newspaper, where he stayed running for 2 years. Rupert designed the brown bomber to fill the void of Black superheroes. He was determined that the brown bomber would be a different type of superhero, one with the confidence of Muhammad Ali, who preached nonviolence and challenged readers about white privilege. His early strips covered all the everyday stresses of college campus, poked fun at some leaders, but also tackled larger societal issues. In the last panel of The Brown Bomber from Rupert's college years, the superhero comes out as gay, mimicking Rupert's real-life trajectory. This move was not without pushback. After all, it was 1979. But when it was all said and done, Rupert felt free. For Rupert, comics were political and personal. Would you guys like to read these?
Actually, this is rather ridiculous. I'm not the one who should be sitting here in this closet. In actuality, I'm not in any darkness at all. It's the other people on this campus who are in the dark. But still, I refuse to show my face or my delightful bod on this campus again until I can be sure that I will be accepted as my real self. Please accept me as I am.
Wait, there's one more panel. One more.
Come on, Bomber. You got to come out of there. The next issue of the Cornellian is supposed to feature your 50th appearance in this newspaper. You just can't let us down. Hey, wait, maybe you should stay in there. I mean, I don't know. If we want to be confronted with, well, something we've never really dealt with, I just think, hey, nerd, he might hear you. He may never come out of there, and it'll be the fault of people like you. You might learn a lot more about yourself if you try to understand him, you wimp.
I wonder if James Baldwin did it this way.
Upon graduating college, Rupert moved to Portland, and the Brown Bomber followed. BB first popped up in the publication Northwest Fountain, and then on the pages of Willamette Week, Just Out, where Rupert was art director. In Portland, BB met his sidekick, Diva Touche Flambe, a lesbian cosmic spirit who came in with the righteous energy of Portlandia. Rupert came up with her dramatic name and then drew a character to match. He was excited to incorporate the wisdom and patience of the women in his life who were great influences on him. Rupert saw parts of himself in both the characters. The title Cathartic Comics came about to allow for the two superheroes to have more equal footing. Technically, the strip was authored by Professor I Be Gettin' Down, an alter ego Rupert created to separate his comic artist self from his role as art director. Through Diva, Rupert's comics speak loudly and directly, especially through the art of slapology. The idea of slapology came from the movie trope where a quick slap to the face would knock some sense into a person. Diva harnessed the art to enact good in the world. Bomber, that's you.
With the celebration of Black History Month, I'm sure you as an African-American gay male are really examining the discrimination you face because of your race, much more than your sexual orientation, right?
No way. I bet you're still overwhelmed by the hardships that you face as a gay man, which must be much worse than anything you experience as a black man.
He's wrong. People are much more racially insensitive to you as a person of color, huh?
He doesn't know what he's talking about. Homophobia is your biggest cross to bear, isn't it?
Before I address this issue with you both, could you please not use me as your footrest?
Rupert's character lived lives beyond Portland, gracing newspapers in San Francisco and Chicago. His comics were collected into a book published in 1992, and a new book launched this year. It's a full retrospective of the comic strip written by Rupert, and it's available for sale now. Thank you, Rupert, for being here tonight. No cartoonist on earth has received more disgruntled letters than I, John Callahan once wrote with pride. He was an equal opportunity offender with his cartoons, receiving streams of disgruntled letters from readers who accused John of being sexist, crude, unfair to Sally Struthers, and insensitive to quadriplegics, though he himself was a quadriplegic. Readers were also appalled by his simple doodling drawing style, which was described as rudimentary and childlike. We know all of this because John published his hate mail in a book. In his mind, the only thing in the world worse than being harassed is not being harassed. John was born here in 1951, and his birth mother left him in an orphanage. He was adopted into a family, but his childhood was unhappy. John felt resentful and like an outsider in his own home. He would seek comfort in books and drawings. John found an outlet making cartoons for his friends, mocking the nuns at their Catholic school. Alcoholism and depression kicked in for John by age 13. In 1972, an alcohol-fueled car accident where John was a passenger left him paralyzed from the diaphragm down. Suddenly, he was fully dependent on nurses, doctors, and live-in aides, but he found he could hold a pen in his right hand and guide the pen with his left. It would take a few more years after enrolling in AA for John to give up drinking for good and fully develop his creative talent. At age 28, he went back to school to get his English degree at PSU. Back in the classroom, drawing cartoons for his classmates again, John thought he could make a go out of being a cartoonist. It took getting sober for him to be reconnected to the creativity he had as a child. John's spiky red hair and the way he zoomed all over Portland in his wheelchair, speeding by shocked bystanders, made him a local celebrity. As often folks would see John in the streets, they would see him more in the papers. He got his first cartoon published at the Willamette Week in 1983 and would continue to publish there for 27 years. John was given a complete creative freedom, even if it ran counter to the paper's point of view. John was one of the most frequently published artists in Clinton Street Quarterly, contributing to 14 issues. Within a few years, his work was nationally syndicated with Playboy, National Lampoon, and so much more. Fame followed. In an interview on Fresh Air, John said, "People are very condemning of me until they find out I'm paralyzed. Then suddenly they agree that I have the license to kill or something." For as many as irate letters John received, there was also a great number of people with disabilities who thanked John for portraying them as fully developed humans rather than objects of pity. John felt more comfortable being the subject of disdain than admiration. He mined his own tragic stories, but relayed them with such a wry humor and a level of matter-of-factness. Like in this piece, How to Relate to Handicapped People, he says, quote, "Be sure to mention the Special Olympics at least once." While his cartoons may have been considered irreverent by some, John's Nickelodeon animated series, Pelswick, was imaginative and empowering. First airing in the year 2000, the show was based on a comic series for kids that John created by the same name. The protagonist, Pelswick, uses a wheelchair, but that doesn't stop him from having school adventures with his gang of friends. Art imitates life in episode 3 when Pelswick enters a cartoon in his school's newspaper that was somewhat controversial. The paper was banned. One appalled school administrator says, quote, "My face almost fell off." The paper went unpublished, but the outrage continued. Pelswick realized with dismay, people are offended by something they haven't even seen? John Callahan died in 2010. Robin Williams, a fan, had optioned John's book, Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot. 8 years after John's death, Portlander Gus Van Sant took the helm and directed the film about his friend, which was released in 2018. There is a John Callahan Memorial Garden at Northwest Marshall and 21st in front of a rehabilitation center that John spent time at, once as a patient and then as a volunteer. A plaque reads, "Humor heals. It can heal lives. It can heal injustice. It can heal fear." Some called his humor dark. He called it survivor humor. Next to Linda Berry, the name that came up most when interviewing folks about the Pacific Northwest comic influences was Joe Sacco. Many credit Joe with the shift from traditional political cartooning to today's genre of comics journalism. In contrast to traditional journalistic practices, which preach objectivity, Joe invited the reader in with him as the story unfolds. Joe's Rockin' Rose City comic, published by Willamette Week in 1993, illustrates Portland's grunge era, when it seemed everyone was making a record. Joe was born in Malta, arriving in the US, and eventually landing at Sunset High in Beaverton. He heard his family's stories of bombings that they experienced in World War II, an inroad to his early desire to understand the devastating effects of war. Joe graduated from the U of O School of Journalism, and upon moving back to Portland, started publishing comic strips in Willamette Week and other independent papers like The Downtowner. He said, quote, "Comics and journalism began twining around each other." In 1985, Joe started his own monthly satirical publication called Portland Permanent Press with a writer friend. This publication is a who's who of local cartoonists in the 80s, with regular work by Matt Groening and John Callahan. The publication balanced heavy political content with sharp comedic writing. In a column called Joe's Corner, he writes, "When people meet me in social situations, they often exclaim, 'Your magazine is funny, how come you're not?' 'No, really, I am,' I respond apologetically and put a lampshade on my head to prove it." This cartoon is from a pretend Soviet takeover of the publication, with a John Callahan cover, Joe art directing. Joe's work started gaining popularity, and in 1988, he published a comic series called Yahoo! Here, Joe developed the style he would later become known for, combining autobiography and journalism with documentary realism in a Crumb-esque satire. Joe thought of his style as similar to documentary filmmaking. He may switch drawing styles from realism to something more stylistic or cartoony, depending on what the scene called for. Joe is most known for his work, Palestine, published as a series in 1993. Living in Palestine for long stretches, Joe conducted over 100 interviews with Palestinian and Jewish people. Joe's perspective was not as a journalist or an expert, but as an observer. Joe layers in complexity, even criticizing himself, an outsider trying to create art out of someone else's misery. More recently, Joe's wanted to get away from drawing war and violence. His book on the Dene people called Paying the Land was published in 2020 and shows how the colonial impact of the Dene people's way of life. The underlying theme of Joe's work is his concern for history's victims. And our final artist, Linda Berry. Linda Berry technically did not live in Portland, but nearly everyone I talked to in this research cited Linda as a key influence. Living in Seattle for most of the heyday of alternative media, Linda was a frequent contributor to Portland publications. She would exhibit regularly here and was a personal friend to many artists of the era. Many publications covered both regions, and Linda's fingerprints are on everything, from sub-pop record albums to regional magazine covers. So, because of her broad Northwest impact, we're going to make an exception tonight to the research parameters and accept Linda Berry as one of our own. Linda was raised in Seattle and described her childhood as troubled. School was her escape. She saw her first comic by R. Crumb and was mesmerized and started copying his style. Through comics, she learned she could transform the real world. In 1979, she enrolled at Evergreen College in Olympia. Evergreen had a deep creative pool, and it was there she met Matt Groening, who went on to develop The Simpsons. They both describe their friendship as being deeply influential to each other's creative trajectories. For Linda, creating comics was a way of processing the past. She published her first strip in the college newspaper where Matt was the editor. She slipped the comic under the door using an alias, making sure to stretch the boundary of what she thought he would print. He printed her work. Her strip soon became a hit, and over time was picked up by 75 alternative newspapers across the US, running for 30 years. Linda says she was lucky to come up with the rise of the alternative press. Comics were still considered to be an important part of any newspaper. She says, quote, "I happened to be right there with a body of work." Linda and Matt remained close, and their work was often presented in tandem, part of a new idiosyncratic Northwest comic tradition. Some of Linda's first published works outside of college was for the Seattle Sun. She said, quote, "I had this series that was basically women talking to men in the bar, but the men were giant cactuses, and the women were trying to decide if they should sleep with them or not." This satirical piece in the vernacular of an infomercial, How to Catch a Man, challenges the media's messaging to women in the 1980s. She says, quote, "When you think about it, giving up your real personality is a small price to pay for the richness of living happily ever after with an actual man." Her work often had emotional weight and could be described as tragic, morbid, and depressing, but funny. The funny part is important. She said, quote, "When someone is laughing, they are open to new ideas." She calls her work autobiofictionography and describes it as half dream, half reality. It's you, but it's not you. On the more humorous side, Linda tackles a common trope in 80s media, the ubiquitous women's magazine relationship quiz, written by Love Dr. Linda Berry. This guide to the perfect relationship asks the user to mark a date of their first kiss, check a box for tongue or regular. It goes on to question the reader about what seems like a very toxic relationship. This appeared in Portland's Clinton Street Quarterly, an issue where she was also interviewed by Jim Blashfield. Linda was a darling in the Portland creative scene, her works regularly appearing in Willamette Week, Clinton Street, and even Sunday Oregonian magazine. So, for those following along, this meant that Rupert Kennard, John Callahan, Matt Worker, and Linda Berry were all freelance artists for Willamette Week at the same time in the 80s. Rupert remembers being giddy seeing Linda in the Willamette Week office delivering her work. In 1984, this Northwest Magazine article states, "There must be something about the high precipitation and lurking mildew that breeds comic and graphic visionaries." In a way, it is apt that Linda Berry doesn't fit nicely into the theme of this event because she is an artist whose work defies labels. Linda has spent her later years writing graphic novels and as a teacher at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her graphic novels and YouTube video series are warm, funny, and welcome you into her creative world. She wants you to know you can do it too. In her book, Making Comics, she says, "I knew I couldn't teach the kind of cartooning that people call professional, but I wondered if I could teach what I knew about the power of comics as a way of seeing and being in the world." I just want to give a huge thank you to everyone on this list, my friends at the Oregon Historical Society. And with that, I would love to invite Kristen back up and our panel up. And they are going to discuss the contemporary works of nonfiction and political cartoons today. So come on up. Okay, if you could sit in the order of John, or actually just speak in the order of Jonathan, Shay, and David. That'll match the...
Shay in the middle. Do we all have...
Shay, David, perfect. Love it. Do I have a mic or am I using this one? I think
Share.
we can share if it's on.
I think you can have mine.
This is good. Ooh, good mic. Hi, we're getting, oh, here's one more. We don't have to share. Thank goodness. We're going to dig right in. So, but first I want to have our folks kind of introduce themselves, which they can do a little bit better than I can. And I'll kind of frame it with a question. I guess it would be great if you guys could just each share a little bit of your work with the audience and kind of describe your relationship with, you know, like the art of political cartooning in general, what you do, and we'll show some work along with it.
It's mine. Oh, so my name's Jonathan. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, I can't tell. My name's Jonathan Hill. I am a cartoonist. I mostly do work for youth audiences, so I make graphic novels for middle grade and young adult. And so when Melissa got in touch with me, I was like, I'm not a political cartoonist because I don't feel like one, but I actually have been doing the political cartoon for the Asian Reporter for 18 years. And then I was like, oh, I guess I am a political cartoonist. But I think the difficulty with that is because I didn't, you know, this is the longest gig I've ever had. And I think my editor, Jody, is here. Where are you, Jody? Jody in the back. I've worked with her for almost 2 decades. And, you know, I think, so this is one from this year. And I think the first slide it cycles through was the first one I did in 2007. And I think Jody saw my work at the Buckman Art Show. I just had some drawings up. And I was I said yes because I always want to try to do something new. And so it was really interesting to learn how to do it, because I didn't think of myself as a political cartoonist, because I always think in terms of narrative, and I think it's closer to like editorial illustration, where you're again using imagery and all that sort of stuff. So anyhow, so this has been a little bit of being here and talking to Melissa and being up here with Shay and David. It's a little bit of an existential crisis for me, because I'm like, but I want to own it that yes, I am a political cartoonist. And I don't know I do them once a month, and they don't always necessarily, I think, are great, but you do something for 2 weeks, a year, and then it became a month, and whatever. Anyhow, for 18 years, some of them will be okay, right? You know what I mean? So anyhow, so that's where that's the convoluted context of me and why I'm here.
Like the most perfect self-effacing graphic novelist kind of introduction ever. So very relatable.
Hi everyone, I'm Shay. I have a background as a journalist, so I worked in print media and podcasts. I actually worked with Kristen at the feminist magazine Bitch, and then started making zines and comics professionally back in 2017. So a lot of my work is zines. I just showed you a few up there. I also love to draw digital comics that I publish online, often with political themes. So often they're about just sort of sorting through my big feelings about what's going on, whether that's about my identity or whether that's about what's going on in the country or the world. It's a lot of using comics for emotional and political processing. And I love to self-publish my work, so I just like to get my stuff out there. I'm really impatient, and I don't like people telling me what to do. So zines are great for that, and you can make a zine for 10 cents and just put it out there in the world. But recently I've been running this nonfiction comics press called Crucial Comix, where we publish nonfiction comics by artists around the world. And it's a teaching press, which means we run classes online, then use the money from the classes, we pay the teachers, and then use some of the money to pay artists for their work. They publish on the site and then also as zines. So it's been a really nice way to expand the work that I do. And I would say that the press really has kind of political focus, because we're publishing stuff that people have a hard time getting published in other places. So whether that's stories by people with marginalized identities or on political topics, that's what we're focused on, is what comics feel really crucial that other publishers aren't going to touch. And because we're really independent, we can do that. Part of this is also motivated by artists publishing all of their work these days on Instagram, and that being a platform that's controlled by billionaires. And so I feel really conflicted about every time I publish a zine on Instagram, I'm just making money for Mark Zuckerberg. I don't want to do that. I want to have a cartoonist controlled platform where we can publish our own work, and every comic we publish supports the other people's work. So we're trying to create this mutually supportive publishing platform. We just celebrated our first anniversary, so it's yay. We've been around for a year, and the scheme is working, essentially. Last year published about 65 comics, and we paid artists about $18,000. So that feels pretty cool. Yeah. And that's pretty cool for a project that I run out of my house. So that's really exciting. And in addition to publishing comics on the website and then also as zines, I think we have another slide of, there's a book that we made. It's stalling. Oh, okay. Well, maybe we'll see an image of it. But last year, we're trying not to publish books because they're really expensive. But we did publish a book last year called Cartoonists for Palestine. That's an anthology of comics about Palestine and about the ongoing genocide. And that's a fundraiser anthology, so we donate all of the profits. And it includes artists, about 60 artists from around the world. So it feels really cool to, in addition to publishing work to support artists and to get it out there in the world, to also be hand in hand with that, we're trying to raise money and be involved in community. So that's what we're doing at Crucial, and it feels really, really nice to expand my work beyond myself to other people. So I'll stop there.
I love that you're the political cartooning for you is not only what you're making, but the act of putting it out there.
Yeah,
That's
I think
really
it's
cool.
what's your intention? What's your ethos? What's the community that you're making? And I think people think of political cartoons as a lot of the examples that Melissa showed, like one comic, like one panel comic in a newspaper. For me, it's more about like, what's the ecosystem you're working in and what are you building?
And building the ecosystem too. Yeah. Thank you. David.
Now? Okay, here we go. Hey, everybody, I'm David Walker. Man, I'm having like the worst case of imposter syndrome sitting up here right now. I don't know why. But so I guess you'd call it a failed cartoonist. I used to draw a long time ago. But it was a combination of I had no patience, I was very lazy, and I found that writing was so much easier. So I focused on writing. And I was trying. It's interesting because watching part of this presentation when you were doing the Alties was like this flashback to my youth, because I came of age here in Portland in the 80s, and I was reading a lot of the newspapers, and so Rupert's work and Linda Berry's work, John Callahan's, those three especially, had this tremendous impact on me as a kid, because it felt like all three of those were comics I weren't supposed to be looking at, right? And so that really sort of influenced me, and I loved the fact that like Callahan seemed to offend somebody every single time he did something, and that was sort of like a goal that I wanted. But again, the cartooning didn't work out for me. I did a brief stint as a journalist working at Willamette Week, of all places, and then I decided that I needed to chase after my dream of making comics, which is what I always wanted to do. And so I kind of pushed everything aside and began focusing on trying to break into comics professionally as a writer, and that's where I'm at now. I work primarily in original graphic novels. I've worked for Marvel and DC and like those evil corporations, and I did say that they are evil corporations. Now I just work for less evil corporations. And this is from my book, The Black Panther Party Graphic Novel History, which came out in 2021, which is, this is one of my legacy books. This is the book that's going to be around long after I'm dead, and they will talk about it. And it's, honestly, it's one of the things I'm just most proud of. And, my work, I don't think of it as being political. I just think of it as being like really pissed off, which is me. I'm perpetually angry, and so I'm always trying to figure out a way to make something somewhat funny, at least what I think is funny. And I describe funny as the guy standing next to you is the one that gets run over by the bus and just barely misses you. That to me is funny, right? And so I'm always trying to turn my anger and my sadness into something funny. I think Richard Pryor is the funniest human being of all time, but I also think he's not funny at all, right? Like if you listen to his humor, it's really sad. And humor is the best way to heal, or maybe just to mask it. Like it's better than alcohol, right? So. And so that's what I do is I try to mask all my pain and suffering in some sort of humor, or get people to draw cute cartoons to make it look better. And now I also make fake movie posters for. I hadn't done it since 2020. 2020, when we were designated an anarchist jurisdiction, I got so pissed off that every day for like months. I would find really bad posters to movies like Escape from the Bronx and like Cheerleader Squad and stuff like that, and I would retitle them and come up with an ad copy. And I never thought I'd be as angry as I was in 2020, but here we are, 2025.
Surprise, we're all angry.
So today I just did a poster for, what was it? It's PDX Warzone Stumptown Dance Battle, I think is the one I just did. So, yeah.
Well, we have a good crew. We have angry people. We have a lot of people who feel like imposter syndrome, but I think that's a really good environment to have a conversation in a school right now. And I'm curious, David, you got into this a little bit in your sort of introduction, but what for each of you motivated you to incorporate political ideas, I guess, quote unquote, into your work? And, you know, if you've already kind of thought about that or if you have a different take on that, that's fine too. But I'm wondering if you had political influences at all, or maybe was there a particular piece that stands out in your mind as impactful?
Well, for me, there was, you know, just seeing whatever political, you know, cartoons were in the newspaper, and I just remember, and like Doonesbury, you know, Doonesbury had this, you know, that was the comic strip that most kids didn't read, but I read that one. And then when Bloom County came out, it felt like, oh, this is just the right mix. And so for me, I just remember watching people around me getting angry at things and thinking, oh, I want to be able to do this. Like I guess I was like a little sociopath or something, but I wanted to make other people as angry as I was all the time. And it's sort of like this punk rock attitude, right? That's where so much of punk rock comes from. It's just you're infuriated, and I didn't know what else to do, but I could, you know, draw a little thing, and you know, it was, you know, I came up at a time in Portland when gang violence was just, you know, really starting up. I mean, I was literally best friends with the first Crips who you know, set up shop and started dealing crack here in town. And I remember the way the city ignored that problem. And I remember the way the city ignored the problem of the Nazi skinheads who then murdered somebody. And all of that was just fueling my rage. And again, I was just trying to make cartoons out of that. Not particularly good cartoons, but, you know, it felt better than going out and beating people up.
Yeah, I resonate with that feeling of anger, of like, it doesn't feel like a conscious choice. I wasn't like, I'm going to sit down and make a political cartoon. It's more like an obsession. Like, I feel like when I have something I want to make, it feels itchy. Like, I'm like, I have to make this thing. So it's not like a conscious choice. It's more like, I have to make it. And I think with my work, I've always been political, and you know, sometimes I write stuff, sometimes I draw stuff. So I just always have political ideas. I think a lot of my work is motivated by spite. Because like I listen to like political pundits like on the radio or on TV or like just reading stuff online, and I'm like, oh my God, like the stuff that they're missing and the way that they're framing things just feels really often like it's absolutely missing the point to me. And so that makes me feel like, okay, well, if these people are on TV, like I can make a comic about this, you know? And so I feel like a lot of my work is like sort of like filling in the gaps for what I feel like people are missing, or being like, you know, in like mainstream news, they're having this conversation, and that's not what I care about at all. And so that's a lot of what motivates my work. And also just seeing a different way to do things, like feeling like the companies and the people that like get a lot of money and power in our country, it's like constantly infuriating. And I'm just like, give me money, I'll make something cool. And so, you know, no one's done that yet. So instead I'm like, how can we like make different systems to like support more great people and making really cool work, versus like giving a bunch of money to like AI startups, for example. Yeah. And so I think a lot of, I just am always like, there's a better way to do this. And there's things I want to be writing and talking about.
Like a compulsion, like
compulsion,
not a,
yeah.
like if you don't do it, what is it even going to be? Like you have to. That makes sense. How about you, Jonathan?
So again, because apparently I have like a split personality of being like an author cartoonist and then the political cartoonist, I think what's been interesting about working on the Asian Reporter for 18 years is kind of figuring out what's my voice and what do I have to say about it. And I think the reason I never consider myself a political cartoonist, because I think it comes from a journalism. Like I think I've always loved like political cartoons. Like when I would open up the newspaper, I wouldn't read Doonesbury either, but there'd be the spread that has the editorial and then the political cartoon. Mm-hmm. And I could read the political cartoon in 30 seconds and get the gist of what it was trying to make, and I would never read the editorial, you know? And so that's been like an interesting thing, is trying to learn and grow and build that muscle over time. But I also think a turning point for me, and I didn't consider myself political because I had the luxury of not having to worry about that, you know, early, like when I was young and in my 20s. But I remember working at Powell's, and, you know, I did illustration for like the Willamette Week and some other magazines around town and stuff. And I remember someone working with me at Powell's. And, you know, if you think this was like 2006, and, you know, I remember she was one of those people that was always bringing up sort of political issues. And, you know, at the time you're like, oh, it's that person, right? You know what I mean? Kind of roll your eyes. But I think, you know, of course now all the things that she was bringing up, we're thinking about and we're dealing with, and really, you know, I remember sending her an email and being like, thank you for bringing these things up. But I remember her asking me why I only drew white people. And of course I got defensive. I'm Vietnamese American. And I was like, no, I don't draw only white people. Why is it about race? I had all these excuses. And I remember going home that night and really thinking, like, why the fuck do I only draw white people? And I remember going through my portfolio and being like, oh my God, I do. And it was a thing. It was a severe identity crisis, because I was like, growing up, I kind of traveled around because my dad's company contracted with the Army, but my adolescence was in Missouri, in Rolla, Missouri, which is right in the middle of Missouri. And I was like one of the only kids that wasn't white, you know? And even though I grew up watching the same TV shows and eating pizza and hamburgers and all the same things they did, I was the Asian kid because I looked Asian, even though I didn't. But then I go hang out with my Vietnamese family, and they're like, you're not Vietnamese. You don't eat the stuff we eat. You don't speak the language. And, you know, so I was kind of torn by that, but I was like, oh, like, you know, so here, if my drawing is a reflection of how I see the world, and I was only drawing white people, it honestly, it like shook me to the core. And I realized, like, not trying to, like, you know, as writers and illustrators and creatives, we have an influence on creating the world, right? Like, people see our stuff, whether it's a tiny political cartoon or a graphic novel you're doing or a zine you're making. They see the work and we influence the world. And I really thought to myself, like, that's the world that I want to reflect? Like, no, like, I have a responsibility. So even though I don't consider myself a political cartoonist, I feel like my work, even the work that I do for younger audiences, like, it's political, because I feel like I also grew up in the 80s. The only representation I saw of people that looked like me were like Long Duk Dong or like Ming the Merciless. So they were either sidekicks or like comic effect. And I realized sort of like it's my responsibility to kind of make the world that I want to like live in. And so I feel like, you know, now if you look at my books, there's always, you know, an Asian main character, even if they're like, does that identity play into the story? Like, why can't I have why can't I have an adventure story? And I think, you know, some of it was like, well, I want a kid who maybe is in a position that I'm in to be able to see themselves. And I don't know, you know, so that is maybe not like directly political, but I really felt like that was a changing moment in my career, and like kind of thinking wider scope, what is my responsibility as someone that creates, and also as we create the world, why don't I make the world that I want to see? So
Yeah. It's really amazing that you were able to like take that feedback in and make that shift like there. I think you have to be like fighty enough to like want to push back on it, but then also like take it in.
Your story made me think of something that I hadn't really thought of till just now. So my most recent book, Big Jim and the White Boy, it's not really spoilers, but at the end, there's this, the whole theme of Big Jim and the White Boy, which is a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective. The theme is that the story won't tell itself, right? It's how history gets rewritten and all this. And in the end, there's this Vietnamese girl who I knew at the end I wanted to have a teenage kid with their grandfather and talking about, oh, my grandfather has all these stories. And I remembered how living in Portland in the 80s, I went to school, there was a lot of Vietnamese refugees, and there was a lot of racial tension in middle school and high school. But I remember all the Vietnamese kids for their ESL class had to write these essays that they hung up in the school. And I must have been the only kid who read them, right? But I was like, holy crap, like the stories that these kids were telling. And it made me realize, like then, at that age, everybody has a story to tell. We don't know where the kid sitting next to us comes from. We don't know what they've been through. And I just now, as you were talking, realized, oh, that's why I put the girl in my story, was because everybody has a story to tell, and I want to try to get people that don't just look like me, but I do want to get the people who you don't see in books, you don't see in graphic novels usually, because it's usually the same. It's an angsty white teenage boy who, you know, got bit by a radioactive spider, or his parents were killed by a criminal, or his home planet blew up, and now he's got to save the world. And it's like, they're boring, so.
Thank you for that. I think you guys are kind of, you're starting to touch on impact. And I'm curious, for each of you, what are ways that you think your work does make an impact? You're kind of reaching into that conversation. Are they planned or are they not planned? And then how do you think your work might contribute to a broader wave of political or cultural change?
Well, I like what Jonathan said about like you're creating your stories shape the world. You know, I love that. And I think it can be really frustrating, especially if you're coming from like sort of a journalistic background. You feel like, okay, I'm going to write this article about this important issue, and that issue is going to change, right? And that like literally never happens. You know? So, and that's something I've got really frustrated with. I felt like I was just like hitting a wall where I was like, I'm writing all these important articles, and yet things have only gotten worse. And I have to see it as like cultural change takes time, and I see my work as like planting seeds, and I don't know what the seeds are going to grow into, and it's always different than I expect them to. And so a lot of times what I see as the impact of my work is like actually like creating community and creating connections between people and supporting their work in ways that I didn't expect it to. So like I teach comics mostly online, and a bunch of my artists, like a bunch of the students in my class, have gone on to create their own comics and tell their own stories in comics and create pieces that like they never would have if they weren't like in my class. And that feels like magic to me. That absolutely feels like magic. Like, oh, this person was able to tell this story, and they were able to express themselves, and they were able to like share their perspective because we did these silly little prompts together in class. So that's a big impact that we have. One of the books that's like scrolling by on the screen is a book I made called Guantanamo Voices, that's about Guantanamo Bay prison. And the artists, it's 10 different artists, each illustrating a different person's story who has had experiences at the prison. And, you know, one thing going into that, I was like, I want this prison to close. The book has not closed Guantanamo Bay prison. That has not happened. But that, like, a lot of people have read that book and told me like, wow, this really shaped the way that I think about our prison systems, and it's like really made me think about the carceral system in general. And also, it's had like ramifications for the artists who are in the book. So there's 10 different artists, and all of them have gone on to different interesting projects. One of the artists in there, Omar Khoury, illustrated a chapter, and like partly because of that work, he was able to come from Lebanon to the University of Oregon, and now he's getting his MFA at the University of Oregon. And he just like sent me a voice memo the other day. He's like, wow, you like got me across the whole planet to do this. And I'm like, that was not the impact I expected this book to have, but that's really cool. And so that's why when I'm like thinking about, almost all my work is collaborative, and I'm always thinking about what's the ecosystem that we're making, and how can we like create connections between people. It's not just about the work itself, but who's involved and what are they getting out of it, and where is that going to go. So, and I have to kind of let go of thinking like it's going to have the impact that I want it to.
Well, if I can also just add to the way that you're approaching, like you're doing Crucial Comix, I feel like that, you already told us how that has like a direct change in terms of like paying artists, building community, having space for that. So I also think just like, you know, the intentionality between not just the making of the work, but how you're producing it and creating community in that way, I think is like also really important too.
Yeah, I just think about all the things I didn't see when I was a kid, right? When I was watching movies or TV or reading comics, I seldom saw characters that looked like me or looked like my family, and I was only aware of that, right, for a very, very long time. And then, but as I got older and sort of made this promise to myself that, like, I'm gonna, and this was out of spite, by the way, I'm gonna stake my claim. I started to realize, oh, there's other people out there who aren't seeing themselves, right? And so, can I get them into my stories? Maybe not, but can I help them develop their voice? Because everybody deserves to be seen. Everybody deserves to be heard, even if you don't agree with them, right? Like, I think especially if you don't agree with them, because I'd rather see the enemy coming than to have them hiding in the shadows, which, you know, I guess I'm really fortunate right now because they're not hiding in the shadows. But there's something about empowering, you know, people who are marginalized, people who are oppressed, who think that they don't matter, who think that nobody cares about them. And I'm constantly telling young people, and I'm telling older people this too a lot of the times. It's like, and I say this to you, like, you don't know the impact your work is going to have. Like, it's kind of the best part of it, and the worst part of it is that there's going to be someone you're never going to meet who, like, you're going to change their life, right? And because the moment we create something, the moment we put it out there, it's not ours anymore. Every person who picks it up and reads it or listens to the music or looks at the painting, I say this to all people, like, the moment you're done with it, the moment you put it out there, it's not yours anymore. It becomes somebody else's. And then whatever it does to them, you've had that impact. You've helped transform them. And I don't think about, oh, how is this going to transform people? How's this going to impact them? I'm just like, I'm done, on to the next thing. I'll be dead, and I'll never know, like, the impact that my work had. And I'm like, is in addition to being driven by spite, I'm also driven by cynicism. So, but I think that it's really crucial that, you know, that when you find your voice, when each of us finds our voice, we shout as loudly as we can so that other people who are looking for their voice can hear it. And then they can go, oh, maybe I can do the same thing. And it won't always be through cartoons. It'll be through something else. But, you know, I think that each of us has a responsibility to, like, and this is what, I'm going to sound really radical when I say this, to liberate those that are oppressed. That we should be trying to make the world a better place, not a worse place. And so, yeah, that's why I make comics.
That's so, I mean, David and I were just talking about this, like, what seems like 5 minutes ago over in the other room, about how the more seasoned, I guess, or older we get in our careers, the more we're willing to let things be free, and it seems like sort of less scary and more inevitable that someone else is going to pick up your work and make something out of it, and how cool that is. And I think it's been cool to sit here and listen to everybody say these things, and to see Linda Berry up here, who definitely is a major reason why I'm teaching. You know, from being a teenager reading her books and then, like, coming up here and being like, oh my God, I could do this, and still be full of spite. Like, absolutely. Isn't there a thing, like, there's a thin line between love and spite or something? But I see how you're talking about that, and we joke about hating it, but it's also a really generous act that you're talking about. It's really an act of love, too. Unfunny as that is.
What was the question? It was about how, like, putting our work out in the world.
Yeah, like,
yeah.
what makes, how do you want to make an impact, or how do you think your work does?
So I'll be honest, like, being an author is really hard and really depressing, because you make this thing and you put it, and, you know, I came up as a zinester too, and I was so used to just making something and putting it out in the world. And the publishing process, like you finish a book and then you wait a year and then it's out and then you don't get support and you're just like, why did I spend a couple of years of my life doing this? And like seriously, it's not for the weak-willed, like, right? Because it's
Yet the weak will do it, right?
but the thing is then you're just like, what's the point? Like, I've dug this comics hole now in my life that is going to be my grave. But then I remember there being a moment where, like, the comic store Books with Pictures does a monthly newsletter, and Katie, who writes the newsletter, talked about how some parents that bought my book, Tales of a Seventh Grade Lizard Boy, came in, and they picked it up at the Portland Book Festival, and they were like, this changed my kid's life. It taught them, it had them reevaluate the way that they make friends, and it helped them kind of find their identity, because even though the book is sort of about being Asian American and being kind of between worlds and always having to put a mask on, they were trans, and they could relate to that experience of it, and like how it changed their life. And I remember getting the email, and I'm like probably gonna cry now, and just like, you're like, I don't care if it doesn't affect any other kid. If it helped that one kid, like everything that I've gone through, like all the despair of questioning my existence, like that made the world a better place for that person. And so like David said, I think it's really hard. I mean, I think we're all teachers here, and we're all creatives. And I think those are the two hardest things about being a teacher and a creative is once you do the work and you put it out, it, like you said, it's not in your control anymore. But I think sometimes it's nice every once in a while when you hear a story of like, oh yeah, that was a good thing. Even like the students and stuff. And so I think also say thanks to your teachers. Also write artists and tell them that you like their thing, because you don't know how close to the edge we are, and that little note might make us feel like, and I mean, that's a joke, and I'm being funny, but I also think that's serious. I think that we need to show up for the things that we care about and the things that we love, and we need to support them, because right now we're in a place where those things are being actively taken away from us, and if we don't take care of each other, like we can't expect anybody else to take care of us except each other. So like, that's like my soapbox, and I'll get off it, but like, so it was a joke, but it's also serious.
I love the duality of that beautiful statement with, I've dug this comics hole and it will be my grave.
That's the thin line that we're talking about.
We contain multitudes, right?
That's so beautifully said.
We are also literally asking you to be on the soapbox, so you don't get to get off of it yet. So I'll ask another one then. The personal work, I think, is really interesting to me, but now we've kind of established this context for your stake in this future that we have. And I'm curious about your personal perspectives on how the art form of political cartooning has evolved with the changing media landscape. And what are maybe the upsides and downsides of the change? Yeah, I'll let you guys run with it.
So I didn't really think about this. I remember talking to Melissa. I couldn't be at the round table, so we did like a Zoom interview. And I was just like, I think political cartoons, there's so much political work now. Like I think a lot more long form work, journalistic work, like Shay's doing, is prevalent. But something that I was thinking of political cartoons in the space they used to hold is sort of like, for those of us that read newspapers growing up and stuff, is I was like, what's taken over more is like memes. I feel like
That's
memes
so
is
true.
the way that people are sharing the sort of, like, oh, this is how I'm expressing a political opinion. And, it's so like, I don't know, it's so, because it's like, I feel like you need a lot of cultural context around a lot of them because they're so self-referential or things. I don't know. But I feel like there could be a whole discussion on that. But I think that was the thing that was sort of like, oh my God, this is, I think, the thing that has taken over a lot.
That's really interesting. I think they are that like one hit where you see it, kind of like the one panel thing in the paper.
But I feel like it doesn't have the resonance of that. Like it's I think just like the rest of internet culture, I feel like it's like, oh, gotcha, that's a zing. And then you move on to the next one. Whereas, like, I feel like when you see a good, and I don't know, maybe this is being old and nostalgic, but I feel like when I would see like a political cartoon that really like hit that mark or read something, it stays with me. for longer, you know?
It wasn't even just political cartoons, though. I got to be honest, like, 'cause I was thinking about, like, you know, the most political of political cartoons wasn't even political, and it was The Far Side. And the reason why was because, like, you got to know how stupid somebody was when you showed them The Far Side. Because if they didn't get it, like me and my friends were always like, you see The Far Side today? And you'd show it to someone else, and they'd be like, I don't get it. And we'd be like, ha, 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 ha. And so it was like this great litmus test. But that old man feeling that you're having, that old person feeling, I have it too, because it's like we're inundated with so much stuff. We're inundated with the memes, and the attention span is even shorter. But I think that as for all three of us having come up through the zine world, it's like zines and publishing and all that sort of stuff, like you can do it now with the push of a button. You don't have to go like, oh, who's the best printer? Because I got to print a minimum of 1,000 because it's only offset printing. And oh, there's a place in North Dakota. Oh, and they don't censor you, right? Like, and that's what it was like back then. But now it's like, oh, hey, I have a Patreon. Cheap plug. I've got a Patreon, right? And it's like I don't have to worry about who's going to publish my work anymore, and I don't have to worry about where am I going to get the money to pay for a printer. And I can go out and I can look at other people's work that, I always felt fortunate because, again, the newspapers here had the work of Linda Berry and had the work of John Callahan, but there's, parts of the country where, like, those cartoons were never going to be seen. But now things like that can be seen. It's just, are they looking? Do they have the attention span? And are they really stopping to study it, right? I mean, that's the thing. Are they just flipping past? We need to get to a point where we slow down. That's the thing we need to teach people how to do, is just be a little bit slower. Don't I sound like an old man when I say that? Slow down a little bit. Take a moment.
Slow down, you kids.
Yeah. Get off my lawn.
Yeah, I mean, I think the huge shift from like the history that Melissa showed to now is sort of the erosion of gatekeepers. So like imagine distant past when the only way to publish your work was to pitch it to a newspaper, and then the newspaper could say yes or no, and then they would publish it. And those newspapers, as Melissa noted, were run by white wealthy men. And so if they didn't like your comic, it wouldn't get published. And now you have the tools to publish your own work, and you have permission to publish whatever you want. And that's like pretty cool, and really a shift over the last like 30 years, like over my lifetime. So like as David said, you can make whatever you want and put it out there in the world. I like often have people, especially like art students, like a lot of you guys, say, oh, how do I like break into comics? How do I get a job in comics? And I'm like, you have to make your own job. Artists have always had to hustle and are always been like underpaid, but now the hustle kind of looks different. And I'm always like, nobody's going to come along and be like, here's a staff job at a newspaper for the next 40 years, with healthcare. Now it's like you make your own job, and that looks different, and it's always shifting, it's always adapting. And so I think like students at PNCA have an advantage over older people like us because you guys know what the new technologies are. You know where you're reading comics. That's where you could be publishing your work. You're probably reading them on a website I've never even heard of. And yeah, so it's cool that you can make whatever you want. And so yeah, when people are like, how do I get a job in comics? I'm like, make your own stuff, put it out there, make the comics that you want to be making with your friends, and like eventually figure out a way to make money off of it. But I don't have the answer to that because it's always shifting and always changing. So I just like pay attention to how other people are making money and making a living, and being like, is that something I can do? Do I have a better idea? Yeah, it's always changing.
Yeah, thank you. What do you think is notable about Portland's specific editorial illustration or comic scene? I'm curious how that scene, or just the scene here for artistic commentary in general, maybe differs or compares to other cities. And you all have had different experiences other than just Portland, but have a pretty unique take on the city too.
I think I just want to add on to what I just said about how do you make a living as an artist. And I think essential to Portland's art scene is Oregon Health Plan. Shout out to Medicaid. Like everybody making under $25,000 is like supported by the Oregon Health Plan. That's what's allowed me to be an artist. And if that goes away, I'll get a job at a grocery store or something. So I think having healthcare available if you're a freelance artist making very little money is like absolutely essential. And that doesn't exist in a lot of the country.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember moving here just because I was like, well, if I can't make it, at least I'll have health care.
At least you'll have healthcare, yeah.
At least I won't be dead.
I also think that's something like we love to talk about, like the rain makes the comics, but like if I don't have like the healthcare makes the comics, you know. So that's a big note to add. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There might be some of you that are old enough to remember when Portland was actually an affordable city to live in, right? And back when it was affordable, there was an influx of artists who came here, and a lot of them were able to buy houses, and they settled in, and Portland got this reputation. And we still have a reputation of being an artist-friendly town, except we're not, because you can't afford to live here, right? But people still come here, but I think that was part of it. So in the 70s, the 60s and the 70s, there was just this community that really started to develop within the arts world, and you saw it in film, you saw it in the for lack of a better term, the underground comics that were being produced here, the music that was being produced here. And there was, our big sibling up north in Seattle was doing some similar stuff. But I think that's like, then people came who weren't that artistic, but they had a lot of money, and then they bought the houses, and the prices went up, and it's the same thing that happens to every city. Every city that people want to live in, at some point you can't live there anymore. And and I look around at Portland, and it's changed so much that for me it's like it's kind of heartbreaking for me, right? Like I feel like this is a ghost town. I go to places and I've turned into the guy that's like, oh yeah, well, I remember when that was, that used to be a Sambo's. And for those of you that remember Sambo's restaurant, talk about the racism, and that used to be, well, no, I won't even mention the Coon Chicken Inn. That was before my time, but I watch the city change, but I also see artists like trying to eke out an existence here, because like we are an oasis. Every state has like a city or two that is the oasis of hope, where it's like you're less likely to get killed by your neighbors for accidentally backing up into their driveway or something. So I don't know where I'm going with all of this.
We'll just let you keep going.
just to say that I think that this, the city has always felt to me as welcoming as any city can be. It's not my favorite place in the country. My favorite place in the country is New York City, north of 110th Street in Harlem, and you really can't afford to live there. So that's the place where I feel most at home, second to Portland. But there is such an amazing community, and I can go out and, like I can go anywhere and I can run into people who work in comics. And I think that like wherever this industry is going, wherever this art form is going, like part of that's going to happen in this town. It's going to happen here. And like, not to knock the three of us, but we're going to be sitting around going, oh, wow, look at what these young people are doing and trying to figure it out. But to me, that's kind of awesome.
Yeah, I love that idea of the future that we're gonna live in, and you can see it coming. It's like first the artists scope out the city, then people want to go there, then people get tired of it, and then the artists are still here. So, cheers.
Well, I mean, that's the hope, but I think no. I mean, I think what everyone's talking about is like that's a reality that the artist can't be here. You know what I mean? Like I remember when I taught here for like 8 years, And I remember talking to my students, and they live out in East County where I live, and so they're not getting to be in a city and experience culture and participate in it. And I was just like, why aren't you making most of the city? And I was like, oh, because they have an hour commute in. And I think that this is like an important conversation to have. You know what I mean? And I think especially as Portland is in a little bit of an identity crisis, I think it's up to us to decide of what kind of city do we want.
Yeah, I think we've been at such a crux point of like, especially downtown, there's so much vacancy in like residential buildings and commercial buildings because landlords want a lot of rent, and people like are not going to pay that rent to be in downtown Portland. And it's felt for a long time like, okay, we're at this pinch point. Like, are they going to lower the rent, or are we going to like just empty out? And there's some things like, I feel like there's some positive signs of change. Like, for example, there's a new museum opening called the Northwest Museum of Comic Arts that's opening in November. Mike Rosen actually was here earlier. He's running up the museum. And they got a sweet deal on a building in the park blocks. I think their rent is like very little per month because it was like vacant. It's like an office building nobody wanted. So they're like, you can open a comics museum in here. And I'm like, that's exactly what I want to see. You know, I want to see like,
it makes me think of the Lloyd Center.
yeah.
And I feel like the Lloyd Center is one of my favorite things in the city because like in the ashes of failed capitalism, like what has risen? Community has risen.
Yeah.
And I feel like, so things like that, like I think it is a real conversation about like Portland and its affordability, because if you can't afford, like creatives, as we all see, like, I mean, here's the thing, it's like surprisingly the state and the city does not support creatives. Like it doesn't. All the stuff that's happened has happened in spite of that. Like they don't give up. Like, I mean, didn't RAC just close? Or like it's been absorbed
They're still
into-
around. They're
but,
still granting. Yeah.
Like there's not as much funding as there are other places. And the thing is like creatives bring desire into this for people want to live in a place, you know? And I mean, I know this probably seems like a tangent, but I think it's an important issue, and I think it's something to talk about. It's like we need like we all had the luxury of being in Portland in a place where we could have community and be creative and start our careers, but that Portland is kind of on the verge of not existing anymore. It's not, you know, and so like unfortunately, I'm sorry that all of you are having to like live in that. And so like, but we still like, we can do things about that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I guess I feel hopeful that it'll change. People will make something new. You know, like people sort of glamorize like Portland in the 80s because it was
and
shitty.
I don't mean to be that. I think that you're right. Like I think like the Lloyd Center is a good example of that. Is like where community is coming up. But I think you need to have that because that's where your support is going to come from to have the opportunity to be creative. And I think that's been something that all three of us have talked about. You know what I mean? Is having the support, having the opportunity. And so I think those things have to come together. And so how are we gonna make Portland a place that continues to do that?
When I hear people like saying like, oh, back in the 80s it was shitty and it was really affordable. Well, now it's shitty again. That's great.
Right now it's missing the affordability thing.
And so like I want to see people like make use of the shittiness. You know, I live in Kenton in North Portland, and there's a strip club there called the Dance and Bear that closed in 2020. Shout out to the Dance and Bear. And it was just bought by an all-ages music group called Friends of Noise, I think for like $1 or something. And they're turning into like an all-ages music venue. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I want to see happen. You know, so I like am excited for seeing that direction of change versus just like we built the Ritz-Carlton, you know?
But I think, anyhow, that's a whole other thing. But no, I agree with you, but like we have to make Portland the Portland we want to live in.
I think that's like, you guys are saying something really similar actually, which is like that, yes, these things can happen. Yes, we're at a crucial point right now, and we're responsible. Like, it would be nice to have some help, but we're responsible.
Do we have audience questions, or are we out of time?
Yeah.
But then maybe we're out of time.
Yeah, you want to pass the mic so that folks, if they're watching on the stream, can hear.
Oh yeah.
Oh, this is being streamed? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, good thing I wasn't picking my nose.
Is this on? This is on. Hi. I think I've spoken to each of you tonight. I hope you're doing well, and I want to let you know, since you did bring it up, that you want to feel more appreciated. I do appreciate this. This is very helpful for me and my career. Thank you. But also, I guess my question is, we're talking a lot about impact and change, and I feel like as an artist in college, it can be sometimes like intimidating to connect with artists who are already really established, and who kind of have more ideas about the futures that they want to see, because we're still like figuring it out, I guess. So I guess, how can we support you? And also, like, what changes would you want to see in Portland that you think that college students could do in our community? Because it's like, I know when you break out of college, like a lot of artists are just left floundering, like, oh God, what community do I join? Like, do I like go work at some bookstore or some like little art collective or something? And I've seen like a lot of the students here just kind of like try that and be like kind of alone on like a little island trying to figure out their own stuff. So like, how can we support you and connect with you and like, I don't know, just help make changes in this city? Because it's like, I feel like Portland has given me a lot, and I think a lot of us want to give back, but we just really don't know how.
That's so sweet. And what's your name? Sorry.
Oz, like the wizard.
Oh, great. Thanks so much for saying that, Oz. Yeah, I love that question, and I feel like what I say is like, just start making the work you want to make with the people you want to make it with. Like, don't wait around for someone to come along and give you permission, or for someone to give you a job doing what you're doing. Just make it. And like, it's even if you're like, this is shitty, or I don't know, just like start making it with the people you want to work with, and like something will emerge from that. And so I think the big thing you hit on was like not feeling alone in what you're doing. And so I would say you don't have to have graduated from college. You can still be just doing it right now, just making what you want to make. For example, there's some students here who publish Hyphen Zine. Shout out to Hyphen Zine. I love seeing that, because it's just students like making something that they want to make, putting it out in the world. One issue shaped like a fish. That's cool. Like, I feel like that group is not like waiting around for someone to be like, great, we have decided that there should be a student zine addressing these issues. They're like, I'm just going to make it. And like, Oz did a great job tonight coming and talking to each of us at our tables and like saying, oh, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I'm making. And that shows a lot of initiative. So like literally just talking to the artists that you want to talk to and being like, here's what I make. If you can bring like samples of your work, that's part of why I make mini zines, is to give them to artists that I love. So having something to give to them and to be like, look, I made this. And you can be like, cool, thank you. So that's my big advice. And then also just knowing that like the road is really long. Like, I'm 39. I've been making comics my whole life. I've been making comics professionally since
you're
like,
so young.
I know. But like I was like super hungry when I was in college and worked like was like, I got to start making now, like time's a ticking, you know. So I started working professionally as a journalist at like 19. And like it's taken 20 years to get to where I am now. So I think a lot of people graduate college and it's like there's no clear pathway forward. In college, it's like, here's the classes I'm taking next semester, and then here's the grades I will get in them, and then there's the next step, and then it's like, oh no, the ladder to climb has absolutely disappeared, and you have to just like build your own and make your own way without anybody giving you approval every 6 months that you're on the right path, and that's tough. So just know that like the road is really, really long and ever changing and ever evolving. Sometimes like maybe you went to college for painting, but you realize you love making comics. Or maybe you went to college for comics, but you realize, you know, you actually love teaching. And things can shift and change. So don't like box yourself into being like, here's the one label and the one thing I do. But keep paying attention to like, what do you want to be making? And who do you want to be making it with? And just do it.
I want to amplify everything you said and just say, like, as someone who knows a lot of you a little bit, just show up. Like, just be where stuff's happening that you want to do. That's when I moved to town, I was too old to be an intern, but took an internship at Willamette Week, which is where I met David, actually, 150 years ago, and was scanning Callahan's comics and like super geeked out, like really afraid to talk to anyone, and absolutely did not like try to be the voice of change there. I just like made a few things, but I learned about it and I like kept showing up, and then I started getting bossier, which was in my nature eventually. But I think all of you have that in you too. I think just showing up is like a huge part of it.
Yeah, there's this organic thing that happens, right? and you don't even necessarily always see it happening while it's happening. You just look back one day and go, wow, this happened, right? Like, you think about who your friends are, and it's like, well, how did they become your friends? You just met them on the playground or wherever, right? And it's just like suddenly you're friends, right? And it's the same thing happens with like this, with an artistic community or a creative community or anything. But you know, Kristen's right. You just have to show up and know that the journey never ends. Right? You're always going to meet new people. You're always going to have new experiences. You're always going to think, oh, maybe I should try something different. At least that's how I feel it should be. And, you know, and in time, you wake up one morning and okay, this is going to sound so corny, but this is what I tell my students all the time. You can't see the mountain when you're climbing it. Okay? It's not until you've gone to the top and gone down the other side, and then you look back and you go, holy crap, I just climbed that mountain, right? Your whole life is going to be a series of mountains that you climb, and you're not going to know that you're climbing them in the moment, other than you might be like, whew, man, I've been walking uphill a really long time. And then there comes a point where you're walking down the hill, and it seems a little bit easier until it gets to be a really steep decline, and then you trip and fall, and you roll, and you break all your bones, and whatever, right? But it's all you can do is just express yourself creatively. You put it out there, and eventually you're going to find your tribe, your people, your community. Like, I've seen it happen so many times. The more you stress about it, the more difficult it seems, and you just sort of let it be, right? If you're in the middle of the ocean, you don't swim. At some point, you just have to float on your back, because otherwise you're going to become exhausted. Just float on your back and enjoy the ride for a while. And I can already see you've got the makings of a community right there, right? And then who knows where you'll be a year from now, 2 years from now. It's such an organic process.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything. I think Shay said it so well, is make things with people you care about, and that it takes time. I think that's the thing, is I think a lot of what people just want it like to happen, but it will happen. It takes time and being patient. But no, thanks. Both of you put it very well.
I'm going to end with one more question. It's getting late, and I want to respect everybody's time, but we've got some good ones here. So I think I'm going to go with this one. What guidance do you have for a beginning cartoonist who wants to maximize the exposure of their political cartoons and have sort of the greatest impact on society? A small question.
I think, well, like, I'm always interested in somebody who has a unique perspective and like a clear style. I want you to be saying something that's like you. And I see a lot of people like submit political cartoons to us that feels like they're trying to emulate some other style. They're trying to draw like the Boss Tweed comics, or they're trying to draw like about like Russia and Ukraine. And I'm like, I want to hear about you. Like, what do you care about? What's going on in your world? And have a style that's like your perspective. So whatever you're experiencing or whatever you're thinking about, that's what I think you should be drawing about, as in political terms. So rather than going like global politics, if the global politics have nothing to do with you, what's local? What's like based on like what you're experiencing or what your friends are experiencing, what you're seeing around you, and being like, here's what I have to offer. Here's my particular unique voice and perspective on this. And then drawing in your style. Like, I love that we have like John Callahan's comics in there, for example. Like, John Callahan is drawing like himself, and you can draw like yourself rather than trying to emulate somebody else's style because you think that's like, this is what political cartoons look like. So like, yeah, what's a story only you can tell?
That's so important. I had a drawing teacher who said, like, when you're looking for a concept, you kind of get so personal that you get to this core that's like at the center of this circle, and then it pops out and becomes universal because you can like relate to it. That feels really real to me.
Well, and I think that advice is amazing advice, great advice, and it doesn't just go for political cartooning. I think it goes for anything. It's just like, but that being said, is I also feel like, I was going back and looking at work that I did in college, and I didn't grow up wanting to make comics. It was all new to me, and so as soon as I learned from an artist, I basically, you could tell in each of my projects which project I had just learned about so-and-so, because I was copying them. But like, there's something to be said about that, because what it did is I was able to like, it was kind of like a buffet of like, okay, I copied this because I loved it. What do I like about it? And what don't I like about it? And now that became part of me. And then I kept doing it. I kept copying artist after artist. And so like, I think something when you're young is everyone so like, I think that like you should make something that's unique to you. But I also think there's something about that part of that long road is learning and growing, and I think copying can be part of that. And so it's like, I don't know, I think it's all part of a picture, and I think part of it is some of feeling out who you want to be in the world. And I think at 20, there's these expectations that you're like, oh, this is the artist, this is my market, this is this. And I think that it's okay to be slow and just make and learn, and like keep making art, and you grow from learning, you know what I mean? Like, or from making, I don't know, so.
Maybe feedback too. There's a question here about feedback, and I've been thinking about Melissa's presentation a little bit and how much feedback people had throughout their days. You get exposure by asking people for advice too, and I think just coming here, asking these folks questions, showing your portfolio around, collaborating with other people, getting other opinions.
I think that's where that community that we've talked about comes in so importantly, because then you're not just in a silo, and you also don't feel so alone. But yeah, that is really important, because you can't grow without that, right?
I think the worst thing you can do, and this is going to sound hypocritical because I make a living with my art, right? But I think the worst thing that you can do is start off with the goal of making a living, making money off of your art, making money off of your creativity. I honestly believe that, like, if we don't practice our creativity, we die inside, right? Now, if we practice our creativity and someone gives us a little bit of cash, hey, that's great, fine, right? But don't do it for that, especially when you're getting started. You do it because you're learning who you are. You're learning, you're finding your voice. You're finding your community. And it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult to get your work seen. I'm noticing that, yeah, Instagram, no one's liking my Instagram posts all of a sudden. Well, is it because they're too political? Probably, right? So, and I was talking to a friend who subscribes to my Patreon, and I was complaining, and I was like, no one's going to my Patreon. And he was like, oh yeah, because the emails that Patreon sends, I just look at it there, so you're not seeing the clicks, and nobody's pressing like, and no one's leaving comments, and you're 39, I'm 57, and I'm like, this is why imposter syndrome is choking me right now, because it's like, does anybody like what I'm doing? I don't know. And then you know what I do? I go, yeah, I don't give a shit if anybody likes it or not. I'm going to do it anyway. And then you hit the publish button, and it goes out there, and I don't know if one person has seen it or 1,000 people are seeing it. I got it out of my system. I had to say this thing today, right now. And I, like Shay said, I don't have any patience. I got to put it out right now. So.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And thank you, Melissa and KRB.